Welcome to Startup Fashion Week's Designer Diaries. I'm your host, Dee Silkie, and joining me today is Hayley Spurdle. And she is the creator of a fashion brand called RACCOONGUTS. Today we're going to learn all about Hayley as a designer, the inspiration behind her brand, and what her plans are for this week's Startup Fashion Week. Hayley, thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a crazy time. We've been wearing our masks the whole time until this interview. But I wanted to ask you more about yourself and RACCOONGUTS. And my first question is, how did you choose to start a career in fashion?
The way I chose to start a career in fashion, actually, it kind of came from me being very artistically inclined. Like, I always loved drawing. That's what I did my entire life. And I knew, I was like, I want to be an artist when I grew up. But then, I want to be an artist is a very vague thing. But I also used to cosplay. I still do, but I used to cosplay a lot more. So I had sewing and, like, artistic sort of design skills. And I had my art teacher in 12th grade when I was working on AP portfolio. When we were looking at all of it, she looked at it and just went, you know what, Hayley, I think all of my students are equally gifted at something specific. I think you're my most skilled design student. And I went, okay. And after I graduated high school, I sort of thought about that, like the coalescence of the design that I liked to do with sewing that I knew how and enjoyed seeing at least the final product of. And eventually that led to me, instead of just drawing whatever, I started leaning towards drawing dresses and trying to design jackets and altering clothes that I had and doing more embroidery and stuff like that, which is kind of what led me to looking at fashion design. And then eventually, because at that point in time I lived in Alberta and there's not a whole lot for fashion in Alberta, but my dad lived out here in Toronto, so I decided that I was going to move out to Toronto. I was going to apply to school, I was going to try looking at Ryerson, and then I moved out here. I started RACCOONGUTS a couple months after I moved out here, right at the very beginning of 2019, and then applied to Ryerson, and now I own a brand called RACCOONGUTS, and I'm a Ryerson student. So.
That's awesome. And it's funny that you mentioned wanting to be an artist, but that's such a huge umbrella term, and what specific kind of art do you want to do? And you can see in all these pieces, all these different fabrications that you use and all these different textures that you create. So it's cool that you have that art, incorporated in all of your different pieces, and you have a really unique style. What makes you passionate about your brand? Like, what makes RACCOONGUTS stand out from other brands?
The thing that I am most passionate about with RACCOONGUTS is a sense of, I guess, individuality with it. Like, one of the main things that I am happy about when I get a piece done is it's the same thing where I kind of look at it and I go, you won't find something like this in a store. That sort of idea, that it's got an amount of handcrafted, individual design that hasn't had to go through a bunch of rungs of what's the most marketable this year. Just my creation. What do I think is going to look good? What do I want to see this year? And what do I want to see in this collection? What does this collection mean to me specifically? What themes do I want in that?
So for the viewers that are watching, where would you recommend getting inspiration from?
Where I've gotten the most inspiration from, a lot of the time I do enjoy watching art movies, and I love watching the movie, seeing the colors, and whatever the feeling I get from that movie or the feeling I get from watching whatever piece of media it is. It's a feeling that I kind of want to translate into something else. Like, even, this was unintentional, I didn't realize it was going to go red, but I'm a big fan of horror movies, and with this, it's the same kind of, just like how you see splattering of something somewhere else, and you're like, you see that, and you're like, oh, it's red, how'd she do that? It just happened, but...
That's awesome. So what is your biggest hope to get out of this year's Startup Fashion Week?
My biggest hope is really getting my foot in the door in the Toronto fashion circuit, really. Because up until this point, I just did some indie shows. I did Startup's opening party last year.
I remember Astrid was wearing something.
This was a jacket she was wearing, actually. But yeah, I want to actually get my foot in, because there's lots of people who kind of, when I say, oh, I did this thing, and they go, oh, right, that.
Yeah.
I'd want to have more of a, oh, you're this person, you did this, just immediately. So that kind of getting known and eventually maybe being able to start doing more production of clothing. Not the same individual pieces, but things like the t-shirts that I do, like this one that I'm wearing are all silk screened by me in this house. It'd be nice to be able to build more of a market and be able to partner with people and make more amounts of things and actually make money off of it.
So that's interesting, and we were speaking earlier about how a lot of your pieces are upcycled and they have your own unique touch, but in the future you're looking to go into, you know, more production runs like you mentioned. How do you plan on keeping that part of that element of your business that is upcycled and sustainable and eco-friendly with doing mass production?
I've had lots of thoughts about that, and even if it came to cut and sewn patterns, be looking at other designers' dead stock, or even if people, because this is something I do now, as people I know, if they have clothes that they don't want, if they give it to me, I'll figure something out. Or because there's a lot of black jackets out there, there's a lot of denim jackets. If I could get an idea for this kind of thing, like for example that denim jacket, which is unfinished, but get an idea, and if enough people had this thing of like donating instead of to Value Village, like donate to this designer, she does things with it, potentially getting enough styles of the same thing and some individual pieces I could do my own actual like artwork with. But that was a thought that I had, is being able to have like a base design, enough of this type of jacket came there, enough of this type of pants, I can go, okay, cool, I can do this design with all these things that were brought in, and it still have that own sense of, I don't know if I want to say individuality, but kind of individuality, since these are all will be slightly different pieces, and also that would take away from these mass amounts of donated clothing that doesn't actually go to stores, that ends up overseas.
How has COVID changed your process as a designer, and how has it redefined fashion for you?
It definitely changed my process as a designer, because a lot of what I did at first was I would just go to a thrift store, I'd look around, I'd see something, I'd get an idea when I looked at it and go, awesome. Now I'm finding myself more sketching and doing all my preliminary processes first, and then having to go look for the items.
So it's completely changed your process, put it on its head. That's cool. It's interesting. You'll probably learn, you're working backwards in a sense.
But it does allow for me to get an idea, find something, and go, well, actually, now I'm looking at it, if I added this or changed this design detail, I think this would come together a lot better. And even with other things with COVID is, of course, it gave me a lot more time to work on things. But for a long time, until I knew that startup was happening back again, I was like, what am I going to do with this collection that I have? Like, this is, by this point, it'll be almost stuff I came up with a year or 2 years ago, and it's not going to be reflective of what I'm doing now, but I don't want to just leave it. Like, I'm not going to abandon it, right?
Yeah, that's true. How do you measure success as a fashion designer?
How I would say measure success. Right now, definitely it's coming from building, like, a brand, building my social media, getting more people who are interested. Even, I don't know if success even has to be monetary. Like, that is one of the ways it could be, but one of the things I always think about with things that are successful is, does it stick with you? No matter what it was trying to do, whatever you're looking at, if it's stuck with you, if you remember it, it's done something right. Even if you remember it because you didn't like it, it's still going to stick in your head. And I would say a lot of success comes from, do people still think about what you've done a couple months down the road, maybe a year down the road? They still think about it every once in a while and go, oh, that was cool. Or they see something they own and go, oh, I'm really glad that I have this, or that kind of thing, instead of just monetary success.
So the longevity of an idea and someone being passionate about that thing that you created. That's awesome. Just one more question. Who would be your dream collaborator? And that could be another designer. It could be maybe someone in the film industry. It could be a magazine, like anything you'll want.
I would absolutely love to collaborate, and whether this is or isn't possible, I guess David Bowie would be an obvious one, but something like that. If I could collaborate with, let's say, David Bowie and do some sort of fashion film with that, I can imagine that there would be a fair amount of creativity and amount of ideas, not just from me, but things that would go back and forth and make some sort of fashion film with it, where it's not just looking at a piece of clothing, just wearing a piece of clothing, looking at a piece of clothing in some sort of film or in a music video or something and thinking, oh, well, all the design choices there were really cool. You know, like that, I like the idea behind it, not just how it looks.
The context of where the piece is in. Yeah. Awesome. So you mentioned building up your social media and building, you know, that group of people that's interested in what you're doing. Where can our viewers find you online?
Viewers can find me online. I have an Instagram, which is at raccoonguts.official. I have my website, which is just raccoonguts.ca. My other social medias are a bit more personal, but I do use my Twitter, which I like to sometimes promote a bit on, and I believe that Twitter is also Raccoon Guts. I think it is.
Awesome.
But those are my two main ones, our Instagram and my website.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure getting to know you, Hayley. As always, I'm Dee Silkie signing off for this Designer Diary. Make sure you come and check out our other Designer Diaries with other designers that will be featured in this year's Startup Fashion Week.